Just adding more objects in the rhythm. Okay? That's right in the Mahasi tradition. Yeah, that's right. It's a So many aspects of the Buddha's teachings with regard to the nature of suffering and the possibility of freedom resonate with our own common sense view of things. That is the importance of non-harming as the ethical foundation for living in community, either a local community or a global community. And so establishing that commitment to non-harming, this seems very obvious. The understanding that everything in our lives is changing, and that the more we cling or grasp at that which in its nature changes, the more we suffer. So that also, at least on an intellectual level, is obvious and clear. But there's one aspect of the teachings that offers a profoundly different and radically new way of understanding ourselves and understanding the world. It's one that challenges our entire worldview. And this is the view, the understanding of selflessness. In Pali, the word is anatta. This is not part of our common sense understanding, of who we are. And yet realizing anatta is the great jewel of the Buddha's teachings with respect to liberation. So even though it may be difficult to understand, We need to investigate what this might mean for us in our own experience. As we unfold in this mind-body process, and as the mindfulness gets stronger, we begin to see that the self, what we take to be self, is not what we thought it to be. We see that the body is not self, that thoughts and emotions are not self, that even awareness, consciousness, is not self. We begin to understand through our own practice that the deeply rooted sense of and view of self is a mental fabrication. It's a mental construct. Thinking about this, when we think about no self and what it might mean for us, sometimes it's frightening for people. Because we hear no self and we might imagine that somehow in a moment of realization we're going to just disappear, in a cloud of smoke or something, like a magician's trick. And so in thinking about it, it can be unsettling. But in the realization of it, rather than the thinking about it, it comes both as a great surprise and also as a great relief. All those troubling aspects of our personality, things that our friends suggest we go to a therapist for, and the wonderful qualities as well, all of them are simply appearances arising due to conditions, just like clouds appear in the sky, expressing their own nature. Each of these patterns of mind, the difficult ones, the wonderful ones, they just appear due to conditions, arise, pass away as conditions change. And it's precisely because they don't belong to some core sense of self. It's precisely the realization of selflessness that allows us first to discern the difference between those that are wholesome and those that are unwholesome, and to see that we can cultivate the one and let go of the other. If these really did belong to self, we would be stuck with them. But we're not. They're all part of the passing show. One monk in Sri Lanka just summed it all up very well. He said, no self, no problem. And that is really true. So tonight, I want to speak about how the mind creates this view, this concept of self, even the felt sense of self. How does that happen if it's really not there? How are we creating it? And how we can free ourselves from this great illusion. The Abhidhamma is a collection of works containing the Buddhist psychology, a very detailed analysis of mind and body. It's not easy reading. It's very technical. But Munindraji was a great Abhidhamma scholar, as well as a scholar of the text. And so a lot of his teachings was framed with this Abhidhamma understanding. And it can be extremely helpful as a model for understanding selflessness and how self is created. So in the Abhidhamma, it describes the mind as the knowing faculty, that which knows. So we call that generally consciousness. Knowing of a sight, knowing of a sound, knowing of a smell, a taste, a sensation in the body, knowing of a thought. Just the bare knowing is what we often call mind. So, for example, we hear a sound. Consciousness, the bare knowing, it's just that bare knowing of sound. It's that moment of hearing. Perception, the mental factor of perception, has the function to pick out the distinguishing marks of that particular sound. To name it, so we might hear a sound, recognize what distinguishes it, and name it bird. And then we remember that name, store it in memory, so the next time we hear that same sound, it's perception which recognizes, oh, that's a bird. It's in this way, it's through this factor of perception, of distinguishing the different aspects of experience, naming them, remembering them. This is how we construct the whole world. We construct it through our perceptions, through our recognition. Perception can also happen on a pre-verbal level, because we can see very clearly that animals are able to recognize and distinguish different sights and sounds and smells, but it's probably all happening on a pre-verbal level. So perception doesn't need the concept, but in our species, we have developed that capacity. Just to reassure you, all of this is leading someplace. So when perception, this faculty of recognition, the recognizing, is balanced with mindfulness, it helps to frame the experience. It's like putting a frame around a picture. The concept helps frame the experience so that then we can be more clearly mindful of it. And for this reason, clear perception is said to be one of the conditions for mindfulness to arise. And when we're clearly perceiving the object and we're naming it, it's just like that picture frame, and it allows us to focus. And so the whole technique of mental noting is really in the service of this. The mental note is perception, it's not mindfulness. Right? The mental note is recognizing the particular object, putting a word around it, and it helps us focus on the experience. But when there is perception without mindfulness, well, this is getting to some of the key points, which is often our usual way of being in the world. When we're not being mindful, we're still perceiving, we're recognizing, man, woman, tree, car, house, bird. We're living in that world of concepts. But when there's perception without mindfulness, we are only seeing the surface appearance of things. We're not going to the depth. So it's like focusing on the picture frame instead of the picture. And so we're missing really the underlying realities of what's happening. I'll just give you one example of this. Of when perception overrides mindfulness, or is without mindfulness. So the son of a friend of mine, young boy, I don't know, maybe he was in the first grade or second grade, and the teacher asked the class, what color are apples? So different kids said, oh, they're red apples and golden apples, and green apples. This young boy, his name was Kevin, he said apples are white. And the teacher said, you have it wrong. Apples aren't white. They're either red or green or golden. But the boy was very insistent. And the teacher was very insistent. Until finally, out of frustration, the young boy said, when you cut open an apple, what color is it? It's so obvious when you think of it. But the teacher was caught in the concept of apples being green or golden or red, and was unable to see underneath that concept. And this young boy was. Our perceptions, the particular concepts which we overlay on experience, often condition how we feel about that experience. And the problem is that our perceptions are often inaccurate. So they're coloring our experience in an inaccurate way. I'll just give you a few examples of this. The first year I was on retreat with Sayadaw U Pandita, which I've mentioned. This was in 1984. Very intense retreat. So I was doing walking meditation, and I glanced up at the room he was staying in, and I saw him watching me walking. So, so I started walking more slowly, pretending to be more mindful. So I'm walking back and forth, and every once in a while glancing up at the window. And he's still looking at me. And so this goes on for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and I just couldn't understand it, why he was looking at me for so long. So finally I just stopped and looked more closely, and it was a lampshade. It wasn't U Pandita. And I had created this whole world with all the attendant feelings and emotions based on this mistaken impression. Well, how often does that happen in our lives? I mean, this was a very obvious example, but we're often missing. We're misreading a situation and then locking it in through our perception, through our concepts. We can see the limiting, the tendency to both limit and solidify our sense of the world through concepts in many areas. This is a profoundly far-reaching process. How we overlay concepts onto our experience of the world and then are trapped in the concepts. Just think for a moment how it would be if you came into the meditation hall and somebody were sitting in your seat. I'll bet there would be a moment. You probably wouldn't kill them, but there would probably be some, what are they doing in my seat? As if somehow we owned the space, because we are quite attached to this concept. And with all of these concepts, I don't mean to suggest that they're not useful. They all have concepts of place and of ownership, and they all are useful. But can we see that we have created them, that they're constructs, and so use them skillfully, rather than buy into their underlying reality, which imprisons us? A big concept, one that has a huge effect on all of our lives, is the concept of time, of past and future. How much of the time since you've been here do you think you've been lost in thoughts of past and future? A lot. And this is our lives. We in that realm. And we have the idea that past and future are real. But when we look at what these concepts refer to, it's very interesting. What is the past? What is our experience of the past? We're going through the day, and certain kinds of thoughts arise. Memories, recollections, remembrances. So we put a concept on all these kinds of thoughts that are arising in the moment. We put the concept past, and then somehow toss the concept out behind us, as if the past is really back there someplace, substantially. When our only experience of past is as a thought or feeling in the moment. That's how we experience it. And the same for the future. There are certain kinds of thoughts, of imagining, of planning, of anticipating. We put a concept, future, on this class of thoughts, and then we toss the concept out in front of us as if the future is out there substantially waiting for us. But all that really happened was a thought arose, passed away. In being mindful, it's possible to be mindful in a way that's holding to the present. So it's almost like stuck to the present, instead of let go of the present. And we still are present to the moment's experience, but we're not holding to it, we're not fixated on it. And that's what liberates the mind. It's that letting go. So you might just play with that in your practice a bit. So concepts of place, of ownership, of time, concepts around self-images. We carry so many self-images of who we are, of who other people are. And then we're constricted by the self-image that we've created of ourselves. It would be very helpful to notice, as you're being mindful, of what self-images you're carrying about. How you present yourselves to yourself and to the world. The deepest conditioning we have, the deepest habit of mind, and the root cause of so much suffering in the world is the attachment we have to the concept of self. This was all leading here. The idea, and often the felt sense, that there is someone behind the flow of experience to whom it is happening. Don't we have that sense? Like all of this experience is happening, and we're the ones to whom it is happening. And so we have this idea of self, or of I. We create a reference point for all experience. And then we call that mental construct of the reference point self. So how does this happen? This is what we want to investigate. How are we doing this? Because it's the common way we are perceiving the world. Right? All experience is coming back to a sense of I, me. We become attached to and identified with this concept of self because of a superficial perception of experience and the world. We're not seeing things deeply. That's why I started with perception. We get up in the morning. We look in the mirror. We see a certain appearance. We designate that appearance. Oh, that's me, that's Joseph. We've created a concept for an appearance, and then not looking deeply to see what is really there. We're satisfied with that. And this is what happens in our lives. We're satisfied with superficial perceptions and the concepts that we use, and we don't look deeper. So just an example of this. There are many. You go out after a rainstorm, and maybe you see a rainbow. And the rainbow is beautiful, and usually it brings a certain kind of joy when we see it. But what is a rainbow? Is a rainbow something in itself? Or is it an appearance arising out of certain conditions coming together, of air and moisture and light? So these conditions come together and there's an appearance of a rainbow. But the rainbow is not something in itself other than the coming together of these conditions. It doesn't mean that we don't see what we see. We're seeing a rainbow. But with mindfulness, we are both on the level of appearance, the beauty of the rainbow. And also, we go deeper to understand the conditions which are giving rise to that appearance. So this allows us to delight in the appearance without becoming attached to it, because we understand the changing nature of the condition. So we have to understand, yeah, we're real, like the rainbow is real, but not really real. And that's what Vipassana, or insight, reveals. We begin to see the underlying conditions and processes which give rise to the appearance. And we see that those conditions and elements are continually changing. As you practice and as the mindfulness gets stronger, after a while the whole sense of the solidity of the body disappears, and we really begin to feel the body as an energy field. It's just a field of changing energies, of vibration, of tightness, of heaviness, of the different elements. A strong felt sense of self arises not only when we identify with the body, the concept of body, but also when we identify with thoughts and emotions and moods. All the internal stories we're telling about ourselves and the world. Over the past few days, we've spoken a lot about practicing seeing the empty, insubstantial nature of thought. That it's just this little mind bubble arising and passing. There's no substance to it. And it's to understand that our practice is not about getting rid of thoughts. And people often fall into that trap. They think, good meditation means having no thought. No, good meditation means being mindful in the moment thought arises. We were just seeing that as another object, just like a sound. Because thought, like everything else, is empty of self. It's insubstantial. So there's no problem with it if we're being mindful. The problem is that they're very seductive and slippery, and so we're often unaware that they're present, and then we're lost in the whole conceptual world. Moods, emotions, different mind states are also simply arising out of different conditions. They don't belong to anybody. It's love that loves. It's joy that joys. Each of these are mental factors, mental qualities, each expressing its own nature. So it's the nature of these emotions to be expressive of a particular quality. So love loves, joy joys, anger angers, fear fears. There's no one behind it who's having it or who owns it. But what do? We don't see it that way, usually. We don't see that emotions are just arising out of conditions. We usually quickly identify with them. I'm angry, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm this, I'm that. So right in that relationship, we have created a felt sense of self. It's not that the self is there in some meaningful way. We're creating it through identification with these emotions, or with the thoughts. The my, or I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm happy, the I is extra. It's just anger arising, it's just happiness arising, it's just fear arising. You see the potential for ease in that? We were not claiming it as I and mine. On the most subtle level, and we create the sense of self with identification with the concept of the body, with thoughts, with emotions, with moods. The most subtle level of the creation of the sense of self is when we identify with the process of consciousness, of knowing. You may have all kind of gotten a reasonably good sense, but the elements of the body are changing, thoughts come and go, And you may have some sense of emotions also, just being conditioned phenomena. And still have the sense, well, I'm the one knowing it all. Right? And so that's the last holdout of self. Through identification with the knowing, we create the sense of a knower. We create the sense of an observer. So the challenge for us in meditation, and this is getting really to the heart of it all, is how can we cut through the identification with consciousness, the identification with awareness. So Mahasi Sayadaw, who was Munindraji's teacher, and kind of the grandfather of this whole tradition, he talked about how to be mindful at that time. And it's very specific to being mindful of simply knowing. He said, at times the number of different objects may shrink to one or two, or all may even disappear. However, at this time the knowing consciousness is still present. In this very clear, open space of the sky, there remains only one very clear, blissful consciousness, which is very clear beyond comparison and very blissful. Yogis tend to delight in this clear, blissful consciousness. This is known as Dhamma Raga, lust for the Dhamma. At this time, it simply has to be noticed, knowing, knowing, knowing. So we make the knowing the object of mindfulness so as not to become identified with it. But it's very easy in that place of knowing, you might call it pure awareness. And a lot of traditions talk about it in this way, as if that's our home. We make pure awareness our home. That's the last holdout of self. We become identified with that. The Zen and Tibetan traditions have another way of cutting through this identification with knowing. And it's just a different approach, but very accessible. We don't have to wait to these advanced stages of meditation. In some of the Tibetan Dzogchen traditions, the teaching is to look for the mind to see if you can find it. So there's a very famous Zen dialogue of Bodhidharma. As you know, he brought the teachings, the Buddhism, from India to China. He was this very fierce teacher, and he said he sat in a cave facing a wall for 9 years, and you think you have it hard. And then the person who was to become his disciple, his name was Huike, he came and sat outside the cave and was kind of begging for teaching. But Bodhidharma wasn't responding. Finally, after 3 days, this guy was sitting in the snow, and the myth has it that he cut off his arm. I don't know whether he did or not, it's to show his dedication. Anyway, Bodhidharma finally comes out. And Huike says, please teach me the Dharma. My mind is distressed. Please pacify it. Now, this is a very short dialogue. I just want to caution you. There's a kind of Zen witticism to it. And so people are often responding to that rather than actually paying attention to the meaning. So pay attention to the meaning, not to the wit. Okay, Huike says, my mind is distressed, please pacify it. Bodhidharma says to him, present me your mind and I will pacify it. Huike says, I've searched for my mind, but I can't find it. Bodhidharma says, there, I've pacified it. That's a very profound teaching. The Buddha summed it up very succinctly in his teachings to his son Rahula. And this is something to really integrate into your practice. He was teaching his son. He said, everything should be seen with perfect wisdom. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. With regard to everything, sight, sound, smell, taste, sensations, thoughts, emotions, moods, knowing. This is not I. This is not mine. This is not myself. Surprisingly, through a growing realization of selflessness, we also develop a growing and deepening sense of connection. Because on the deepest level we realize there is no one there to be separate. Separation happens because we've created a sense of self apart from everything else. The more we realize selflessness in our experience, the more connected we are to everything. And on this level, selflessness and love become the same thing. So this is what our practice is about.
So I think it's time for Jill to answer some questions.
So there was a question about moving from side to side or rocking backwards and forwards, and whether to try and hold still or let it go. And I think we covered that a little bit this morning. But one of the things that I found helpful in my own meditation when there's any experiences that are maybe slightly unusual is to just drop in the question, what's the attitude in my mind, or how am I relating to this experience? Because often that will reveal some subtle way that I'm either not wanting that experience or trying to hold on to it or make it more in some way. So even just from time to time, sometimes we can get so focused on paying attention to the breath that we don't realize that there's a lot of tension building. We're wanting the bell to ring, or if the sitting's going really well, we're not wanting the bell to ring. So just to notice, how am I relating to this experience can be a very useful kind of framing question. So with something like rocking or swaying, it might reveal that actually I think this might be a good sign and my meditation is really going somewhere, or it might reveal, oh, I don't like this, I feel uncomfortable, I want it to stop. So just to notice how am I relating to that experience can be really helpful. So early on in my practice, I went through a phase where I felt like I wanted to throw up, to vomit every time I sat down to meditate. And this went on for a few days, so finally I went to ask my teacher, not Joseph, somebody in Australia, what did he suggest? And I was secretly hoping that he was going to give me higher teachings on how to deal with nausea, but he just said, sit with a bucket. As soon as he said that, I realized, oh, I had all this fear and embarrassment and idea of what was going to happen, and when I was just in the moment with the vomiting feeling, it was fine, it was just another experience. So that can be helpful. What's the attitude in my mind, or how am I relating to this experience? This other question is a little bit it's brief to the point of being cryptic, so I might not quite get it, but I'll give it a try. Silence is noble silence. Which is it for this retreat? So I'm not quite sure where that's coming from, but in terms of just drawing that distinction between silence and noble silence, in our ordinary lives, silence can sometimes have slightly negative connotations. We can use it to disconnect from people or to punish them, or it can be awkward if we're in a conversation and we run out of things to say and there's a pause. So the question might be coming from that. So what makes silence noble silence is really the quality of the intention that we do it with. So as we've been talking, if it's founded in generosity, if it's founded in loving kindness, really it's a kind of a gift that we're giving each other this space to really go inward and not have to be anybody for a while. What a relief. We can withdraw. Usually our energy is so much out there that it's a relief to actually be given permission to really go inwards and to get to be friends with ourselves, to get to know ourselves better, to understand our patterns, to understand our psychologies, and to start to let go of patterns that don't help us. And in this way, insights arise and wisdom and compassion naturally arise. So the silence, the noble silence, is grounded in metta and in generosity, and it's a gift that we give to each other rather than something oppressive or disconnecting. It's actually allowing a deeper connection. So I hope that's in the terrain of what the question was about, and if not, you can either write me another one or catch me later. Okay. So this one is about metta meditation. Should one say the words on the exhale or the inhale of the breathing? Sometimes it seems that the saying and the breathing should be aligned. So what is the technique in metta? So again, I think as Uffe and Joseph have been encouraging, the metta can really be a creative practice, and it's up to each of us to take it on for ourselves and really see, well, what works for me. So finding the phrases that feel most appropriate, finding the rhythm that feels appropriate. You know, in the beginning it might seem like a lot. I have to learn these phrases, and I have to bring up this person, and I have to get this feeling going, and it's busy, and now I have to synchronize the phrases with the breath. It's okay. You know, sometimes the phrases will naturally synchronize with the breath. Sometimes they might get so slow that one breath is one word, and you can really stay with may, I. So however it feels natural. One of the beauties of metta practice is that, as far as I know, and anyone I've met, I haven't met anyone who's accidentally developed too much metta. So you can kind of have permission to really be creative with it and explore it and really find, well, what works for you. So those are the written questions so far. Are there any others that come out of what I've said or have come up that haven't already been answered? Yeah.
I've been thinking about, because Joseph said yesterday that the walking meditation was like doing yoga or doing Tai Chi.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been thinking, is the movement of walking sort of superior to any other movement? Or could we just as well be aware of the movement of yoga or anything else?
Again, that's worth exploring in your own experience and see. There's something about the structure and the formality and the simplicity of the walking that can be really supportive, because if we're doing asana practice, we might have a routine, and it can be more complicated sometimes. So sometimes just the simplicity of the walking helps us really stay grounded and develop stronger concentration. But again, it's really for you to explore and see which one. The key thing is the mindfulness, really. Is it helping to really develop mindfulness and concentration, or am I treating it more as a kind of a stretching exercise, or just to, again, maybe to look at how am I relating to the experience and how is it serving the deepening of the mindfulness and of the concentration. So those two are really the key in my understanding. Is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, explore and see. Sometimes we can run away from the walking because we have an idea it's boring, or so to see if there's some attitude, and if that's true, then consciously come back to the walking and see, can I invest this with more interest or more enthusiasm so I'm really making the most of it. I just know for myself the mind's tendency to create busyness in the face of simplicity. So I might set myself a schedule. I'm going to do 45 minutes of Tai Chi, and then the next one I'm going to do yoga, and I'm going to do walking, and I'm going to do fast walking. And we create this whole structure rather than just surrendering to the simplicity of walking backwards and forwards. So yeah, just to check and see how is it working. Thank you.
Thank you.